Peter, let's start with big picture. What are you most proud of from the Louisiana World Exposition?
Getting it open. That was a very big challenge. And I don't realize now how difficult it was, but we accomplished it. And I had come from Lake Placid, where we had the Miracle on Ice, which I produced. And I think we produced a Miracle on the Mississippi, to be honest with you.
Let's talk about that in terms of funding.
Well, I want to go back first and then say the quality of the show and the economic residual are very important, along with opening the show. Times called it worldliest of world's fairs, and that's a pretty high accolade. And the economic residual impact is kind of what we're all here to talk about next month. My son, who grew up as a teenager in New Orleans, is a musician, and he is a musical ambassador for the State Department. And he goes all over the world with his band, doing American covers. And he was invited to the Dubai World's Fair, which is the last World's Fair that happened. And while he was there, he told the manager of the pavilion that I had managed New Orleans. And his answer amazed me. He said, in the State Department, we consider that the New Orleans World's Fair generated $3 trillion of economic impact. Now, that's not my number, and I don't think it's a real number, but whatever it is, it's a big number.
It certainly is. Now, as you well recall, the Summer Olympics took place in 1984. 2 years earlier, you had Disney World's Epcot opening, and not far behind all of that was the Knoxville Fair. What kind of competition did all of these entities provide in terms of just going after sponsorship and just general funding?
Tremendous. I really didn't realize that when I came. The Olympics, not so much. You know, that's basically 10 days, 3 weeks. And it is pretty much so sports focused that in attendance, it gets a whole different crowd. We have more of a family crowd. And the Knoxville, though, how can you have two once-in-a-lifetime experiences 8-hour drive away? And more importantly, it had a dramatic impact on the U.S. government. They really put a lot into Knoxville, and they tried to prevent us from happening. And when we jumped over all the obstacles, which we'll talk about, they really didn't want to approve us. And the reason was money. They had put money up for Knoxville, a lot of it for their pavilion, for this malfunction junction correction. So their budget was pretty hindered when they came to New Orleans. And of course, the people who had gone to Knoxville, and then when they got some of the negative press, they could check New Orleans off without coming. Epcot, that's a very interesting situation. Disney created Epcot because of all the work he did for Moses at the New York World's Fair. He created quite a few pavilions, most notably General Motors and Pepsi, Coke, It's a Small World. And New York ran 2 years. It was not officially authorized. So they were able to do it 2 years. And then Disney said, boy, that's such a great attraction. Let's do a permanent World's Fair. He called it Epcot. experimental prototype city of tomorrow. And his concept was the people from all around the world who managed the pavilions would live together in Epcot. And there would be this people to people aspect of the project. The people side didn't work out, but Epcot is a terrific addition to Florida. It's been very successful.
Well, you also had a change in administrations. Republican administration under the Reagan administration was certainly more frugal, shall we say. And as you said, they recall the money that had been spent at Knoxville. That too proved to be a challenge, didn't it?
Big. As I said, that they didn't want us in the first place. So one of the big hurdles was initial funding. And they basically said, Knoxville's great, we're going to pass on New Orleans. And Floyd Lewis was our chairman, and we discussed it with the Secretary of Commerce. And he said, okay, if you can raise $60 million over the weekend, 48 hours, we'll approve you. And I didn't have much to do with it at all, but Floyd Lewis got on the phone with all the business leaders of New Orleans, and lo and behold, on Monday, I got on an airplane to meet the 4:00 deadline at the Department of Commerce in Washington, and we had approvals for $60 million, and we were then authorized by the Bureau of International Exposition. It's a phenomenal achievement, and you've got to salute the business community of New Orleans.
You really do, and led by Floyd Lewis, who was one of the foremost businessmen, of course, in the area. But it was quite a group effort. Now, I know when you're taking that kind of task on, lots of research is done, and you have to look for those numbers and. The amount of tourists in terms of what the tourism would be that was predicted. Tell me about those numbers, because in the end, there was a big problem with them, weren't there?
Yeah, you hired Buzz Price, Economic Research Associate. Buzz was the world-renowned economic person for mega events. He was first hired by Disney. He did the work for Disney, and he created a new way to project income and expense for World's Fairs, attractions, theme parks. And what he did is he based everything on people per capita. Heretofore, everything was based on square foot. And in retail today, and even a lot of attractions, they still do it by square feet. But if you realize, if you do it by person, the person comes, he buys a ticket, he eats a meal, he gets some snacks, he buys a souvenir, and the longer he stays, the more he spends. So you can create projections and formulas based on how long a person stays and how far he comes from, because the farther away, he's going to stay longer. Now, Buzz was the king of this. He's written a book, Disney by the Numbers. Anybody that reads it, their eyes are open because it's all this kind of language. So he did the study. Buzz and I were friends. He had done the study for Spokane. He has hired me for project. I have hired him. And his projection basically was that by 1984, not projection, he was told by the tourism people that by 1984, there'd be 10 million visitors, not residents, visitors to New Orleans. Now, that's not for the fair, that's just for the city. And that's a big number. And the World's Fair then, based on projections, was 11 million visitors. Now, that's a slam dunk. You're only getting over 1 more million people. and you haven't even included the residents. So when I came, I said, boy, this is New Orleans, one of the greatest cities in the country, right up there with New York, Chicago, Las Vegas, San Francisco. And we're going to get enough tourists coming that the fair should be really able to dramatically exceed its projections. Now, that's annual. Don't forget, in the World's Fair is 6 months. So most of our decisions, and it was me and executive committees, boards, were based on that figure. What we learned, and I didn't go looking for this number, it was not involved in my defense of the financial results of the fair, it was other people, was that 10 million figure was grossly inflated, and it cost us dramatically. Now, tourism figures are not easy to get. There's not a big wall around New Orleans that everybody checks into when they come. You've got airplanes, you've got trains, you've got buses, river boats. So they get all this information, hotel occupancy rates, and they put it through various tests, and now with computers, and that's how they generate the number. It's hard to challenge it. I didn't challenge it. Buzz didn't challenge it. The board didn't challenge it. And because we had what I felt was a comfortable group of people who were going to be there anyway, we could make decisions that reflected that. We could do permanent buildings rather than temporary. So you got the river walk. The people who did the gondolas said, wow, we could keep this here. The people that put in the monorail said, oh, we may have to readjust the monorail and have it run into up to the French Quarter, but everything has a potential. We had a building from Canada with a terrific IMAX theater, and we tried to make that a science museum. So your whole planning starts to change. We could have cut a lot of expenses by doing temporary buildings. And even the U.S. pavilion was basically temporary. And more importantly, people don't know this, the U.S. government, because they saw this abundance of riches, made us pay for the pavilion. And they made us pay for the transportation of the space shuttle to New Orleans. Now, that's all because everybody looked at the study and said, hey, they are going to make tons of money. The mayor said, well, you can't come to New Orleans if we don't have new sidewalks in the French Quarter, we do new street lights, and there's a plaque in the French Quarter that gives us credit, but we still had to pay for it. Now, normally, I did say, wait a minute, we can't afford that. But if I did that, I know between the mayor and the government, they'd say, no ticket, no laundry. And we wouldn't have had a World's Fair. So we went ahead and did those things. We made those decisions because we felt we had the attendance to support the projections, and the income based on those projections gave us a balanced budget. Now, one quick fact. I had done the Spokane World's Fair in the small town of Spokane, Washington, and we projected 6 million people, and we got 5.8, and the attendance of that community was under 180,000 compared to New Orleans, this tourist mecca. All of the people that were here, although the Gulf did present a challenge. So how could they not say, if Spokane can get this, if the ERA projections give us numbers, we're slam dunk. And I would have been right, except for, and we'll go into that later.
Okay, well, no, let's mention it now. You would have been right because of what? Mm-hmm.
Well, a World's Fair is a public-private partnership. It cannot happen without federal, state, and local cooperation. And I have in the documents that we presented to the BIE and the Department of Commerce, the United States government, with all sorts of legal documents pledging support, signed by governors, mayors, city councils, that we're in all this together. And that's important. The BIE agreement with a country has a clause that says the government will guarantee the financial participation, the financial situation of the pair. The United States crosses that clause out and initials it and doesn't agree. Now, most World's Fairs are done by nations, Russia, China, Dubai, and that's where the money is insured. And in most cases, a member of the president's council, president's cabinet, is the head of the World's Fair. So he is right there, everybody's watching, but there is kind of a unlimited resource of funds because of the tremendous return on investment. So the government, by not paying for the pavilion, by not paying for the shipment of the space shuttle, which we never paid, I'll be honest with you there, because we didn't have the money, and by the city making us do the things in the French Quarter, tow trucks and so forth. That costs us money, but more importantly, it costs us that support. So when you have a Republican governor, then a Democratic governor, and a Democratic president, and a Republican president, it all gets in the mix and creates really big problems. Now, where it really gets bad for me is the federal government says, oh, we know, Justice Department, that New Orleans is an onion, and when you peel it back, you just don't know what you're going to find. So we're going to set up some stings to capture what we think will be some of the graft that's associated with the World's Fair. Now, fortunately, we had a very great concessionaire director, and she picked up on something being very wrong, that the application for T-shirts was from the man at the New York World's Fair who handled T-shirts. He had no company. He rented a hotel room. He submitted his application. He opened a bank account. He wrote one check for the fee. And lo and behold, he wasn't real. He was a sting.
So he was the sting.
And I decided, because of my experience, that we would do the T-shirts. But I said, I don't know how we're going to do it because it takes a lot of capital. And the head of Carte Blanche came to me and said, I will put the World's Fair in our Asian buying syndicate. All the department stores pooled their resources, and that's where their buying was done. So we basically started our own concession. Now, at the end of the fair, the sting only came out after the fair was closed. I had a very important public figure say to me, Peter, if it's not for you, I would be in jail. And the reason for that is they're on our, what do we call it, I guess, the council. We have a lot of representatives from the state, from the city, and they all voted for this man to do the T-shirts. And I said, wait a minute, we're going to do them ourselves.
Yeah.
And we did, and we benefited. Now, the worst, that's easy. Where the World's Fair crashed and burned, seriously, this is it, was when the mayor early on, because of a legal dispute over the sales tax on the tickets, seized our bank accounts on the Friday payday. Nobody got paid. The checks could not be cashed. The word went out, we're bankrupt. That's the one thing. Now, the argument wasn't that we weren't going to pay the city, it was when. And the lawyer said, you pay when the ticket is used, not when the ticket is sold. And the city said, no, you pay when the ticket is sold. We needed the money as an advance before the season tickets. We needed all that money to build the fair. And that one act really killed the goose that laid the golden egg.
So many things to talk about. Just for the uninitiated, explain what the BIE is.
Bureau of International Expositions, the BIE, headquartered in Paris, and basically you have to get their approval, and there are member nations, of which the United States is one, and they have to first submit your application, then it has to be approved, and they have enlarged their range in that they have universal World's Fairs, and then they have special category World's Fairs. We were a special category. The World's Fairs can only be held once every 10 years. The specials, Knoxville, New Orleans, can be held almost any time. We were freshwater is ours, energy was Knoxville. So that complicated things dramatically. And what people don't realize, I was not the first general manager of New Orleans. They hired Ewan Dingwall, who had been the same in the Seattle World's Fair. And Ewan didn't even last a year. He got very frustrated over the political situation, and he resigned. Now, Ed Stagg, the Council for a Better Louisiana, visited me in Spokane, and he liked so much what he saw, because in Spokane, the residual was basically taking over railroad yards and railroad stations that were in the center of the city along the Spokane Falls and getting them eliminated, building a World's Fair that was designed to become a city park, and it succeeded. Next month, they're celebrating for 2 months, their 50th, and it's amazing. At that time, Spokane was recognized as generating the greatest return on investment for any World's Fair. I think when all is said and done, even with our loss, we will exceed that.
Let's talk about, I guess, some more of the many positive aspects of our World's Fair in terms of vestiges, and the legacy of the 1984 fair. Your thoughts on that?
What is the legacy? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, it's basically the residual. But in talking about this to a lot of people, part of that residual, which is basically converting an oil community, oil economics to tourism. The convention center is the biggest part of that. I was told, and I agreed, that the only way they were going to get a convention center started was with the World's Fair. So that was the first building. I don't know, 4 or 5 extensions since then. I think you're number 3 or 4 in the country. So that is a huge residual impact. Then I was told recently, and I had trouble remembering this or believing this, food, that people did not realize Caucasian cooking. And when they came to the World's Fair, they had lots of time to experience it. Now, my wife entertained all the foreign dignitaries, and all the wives went to, Khan's cooking school. and he taught them the basic recipes, and they still talk about it, and they took it home to their countries.
Uh-huh.
Then there was music. We think that the music of New Orleans, the jazz, is really known all around the world. Not as much then as it is now. So there were some untangible things that were a result. And then there are things like the Riverwalk. The Riverwalk was designed to specifications for Rouse.
The developer,
Rouse,
the famous developer, Rouse.
yes. And they took it over and made the mall. We had to go bankrupt because the state had taken over our finance. They had a financial review committee when they gave us the last loan, and they had to approve every check. And when they didn't approve it, we had a heck of a time figuring out how that vendor or whatever would get paid. So when we filed bankruptcy, we basically took control of everything again. Then we could negotiate with Rouse their purchasing the building. Because we were in bankruptcy, they drove a very tough bargain. You've got the Riverwalk, you've got the convention center, you've got the fiber mills, condominium, you have the Fulton Street, the warehouse district, and you put all that together. We also were responsible for some 25,000 hotel rooms that were built for the fair. Yeah. And that, of course, gave you the infrastructure to not only grow in tourism, but I think gambling benefited terrifically from the infrastructure and resources of the World's Fair.
With later the casino. Yeah, the casino that came on later.
So when you check all those off, it's a very big impact. And that's what you've got to be very thankful for. I have to be very thankful.
Absolutely. Let's think about some of those, I guess, brighter moments, especially earlier on. As you would walk around the World's Fair site, what were some of your favorite spots?
Well, that's a tough question. I got to put my arms around the whole site. And to be honest with you, every pavilion has a story. And that's what makes it, close to your heart. Now, let's take the international pavilions. We weren't getting international participation. They'd been to Knoxville. Vancouver was going to be 2 years after us. They were going to Vancouver. And the only way that would work is if we got help from the U.S. government and the Department of State. And Lester Kabikoff, at my request, called Senator Long. And he said, we need countries in Louisiana. And Senator Long said, let me see what I can do. Cabby came to me later. He said, Peter, Senator Long is going to get you some countries. He's traded his cruise missile boat for the cruise missile for 8 countries. And lo and behold, a week later, I got a call from the secretary. And he said, Peter, I hear I owe you 8 countries. And he delivered. Now, that makes that those pavilions, very dear to me because I know what went on to get them there. And there's a story like that everywhere you go. Some good, some not so good, and some leverage. I mean, people really came in and said, we've got to be there and you've got to pay. And it's how we worked it out, how we found sponsors. But the Petroleum Pavilion was special to me. Barry Howard, the designer, had designed the Freedom Train that I took over. And by combining an aquarium with the rig, and people could really get up close. And for me, it was not far from my office. And I would go over there, go up to the rig, and I could see out over the fair. And one of my treasured moments is the night before opening, being up there, the lights were coming on. I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of work going on, a lot of paint that was going to be not dry. And I said, we made it. So that pavilion has a special meaning to the Aquacade.
Yes.
That was a big undertaking. People don't realize not only did we have to design a very special uh, arena, pool, so forth, towers for diving, how deep it was. We had to get the Olympic team from, they were headquartered in Los Angeles. Tommy Walker, the Disney entertainment director, was the producer. He called me over about 3 weeks from opening. He said, Peter, you got to talk to the cast and the crew. It's not coming together. We don't have a show. And that was a big deal, the Aquacade. So I went over and we kind of had a town meeting and we got, a little rah, rah, rah. Let's go down to the barn and have a show kind of thing. And boom, we had a terrific show. So I got a special, in my heart for the Aquacade and the gates, the competition, but between the two Mardi Gras float.
The Barth brothers and Kern, the various entrances. Yeah, the two entrances.
Right. And yet it was such New Orleans, and it became a very big topic of conversation. A lot of pictures being taken, and some of my board members said, Peter, use that to your advantage. It's New Orleans, there's breasts, and we got to make that work. And I think it helped. But what you don't realize, all of this crashes when your bank accounts get seized.
Yeah, bad perception there too, right? That doesn't help. The perception is
Right.
challenging, to say the least, too. Looking back, is there any? So many things ended up being beyond your control. You are always known for somebody who's given 110%. But looking back, was there anything that you think you could have done differently?
Not take the job.
Well,
Now,
it certainly haunted you for so many years.
I say that facetiously, but it wasn't an easy decision. Mainly, I just come from the Olympics, and that was a big challenge. It's like kind of running a war, and we didn't have snow. We had snow. It was too cold, too warm, and all sorts of transportation issues. But we had the Miracle on Ice and some really other great sporting side. So my family, I said, we're going to New Orleans. No, we're not. We've been to Lake Placid. Our kids are in a terrific school in Washington. The kids say, no, we'll stay here. You go. I said, no, it's going to be 4 or 5 years. We got to go. No. So I said, well, we'll get a house with a pool. And no, I said, well, we'll find a good school. Well, what school? And to find a good school in New Orleans is a challenge. They were at Sidwell Friends in Washington, which is where the president's children go, and they loved it. And I went to the principal and I said, what are comparable schools in New Orleans? And they said Country Day and
probably Newman, probably.
Newman and Country Day. So I said, okay, we won't go if we can't get you into Newman. Well, getting into Newman is like registering your child at birth. And I talked to the board and everything. I said, I've got to have a good school. And they said, well, it won't work. I said, then I can't come. So they called me back and said, we've got 2 in. And I said, well, got to be 3. I'm sorry. And I don't know how it was done. Don and my kids went to Newman. And it was a terrific experience for the family. And the principal, Tony Cotonio, said the best thing about the fair was the Spurney kids at Newman. Oh. And as a result, it was a good decision because the kids have a lot of New Orleans in them. Peter's into food, Kathleen does special events, John's into music. They all worked at the fair, and they all have close friends in New Orleans. But I'll tell you, it was a very close call. Now, on the other side, the important side, I would not have done so much permanent construction. It would have been almost entirely temporary. That would have cut the costs dramatically. Now, I got to tell you a cute story. about the European Union Pavilion. After the secretary talked that the European countries pooled their resources and they were going to have one pavilion and had the circle, the film in the circle. And the architect came from Belgium. He went to City Hall and he presented the drawings and for approval so he could get construction started. And the city looked at it and they said, well, these are in metric. He said, yeah, I'm from Europe. We use the metric system. He said, we don't have anyone here who understands metric. We can't approve your drawing. And the guy had won a competition to build a pavilion at the World Fair. And he cried. He cried. And he came to me, he said, I'm going home. We can't do it. We're not going to build it. Nobody at City Hall can read metric. So I contacted the architect from Knoxville and I asked him if he'd had any experiences. And he said, I know metric. And I said, well, I'm going to hire you to build the European Union Pavilion. And he did. But we came so close that, you got to have countries, you got to have flags. And that was a lot of flags. So everywhere I go, there's a story.
There is. Let me ask you about opening day.
Very memorable. Once again, Tommy Walker, the only director of entertainment Disney had, he was well known to New Orleans because he did the Saints halftime shows when they weren't a very good football team, and they had post shows and pre-shows. And I think they sold more tickets at times for the shows than they did for the football. But he was friends of Pete Fountain and Al Hurt and so forth. So Tommy masterminded opening day. And it was terrific. It's always kind of a shot of adrenaline and off you go. The interesting thing is we built that amphitheater. Terrific architect. We built it to be permanent, but we couldn't get a permit to make it permanent. So we built it, and all you had to do to make it permanent was put cement down the pipes that were used for footings, and that would make them permanent, and therefore you would have a terrific residual. But the entertainment community, particularly the theater community in New Orleans, didn't want that amphitheater. It would have been a terrific addition. It'd been great for everything from high school graduations and bands right on through to summer entertainment.
Why do you think that was the case? Do you think because of competition? Or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
The theaters in New Orleans, and there was one main, and people in New Orleans had contacts. Everybody knew somebody who could take care of something, and basically the approvals for making it permanent did not come through.
Wow. That was sad. Yeah.
And it's things like this where you try and maximize, and yet you don't realize all that's involved. I mean, it's a wonderful aspect in many ways about New Orleans, but it's a challenge if you come from outside. Now, I got to throw one thing out here. When I came to New Orleans, I saw it from 30,000 feet. And there were a few people like Kabikoff and Augie Perez and Winston Lill, and they made me a New Orleanian. They gave me total immersion. I mean Mardi Gras, festivals, food, restaurants, waiters. Within 6 months, and my wife, we were almost natives. And they wanted to do that so that I would not demean the culture, that I would understand it, the whole Creole, everything. And it worked. I mean, I know what it means to miss New Orleans.
Yes, you do. One thing, and there's so many, but back to the culture and the music, even those of us who are from New Orleans, grew up in New Orleans, in many instances, you had the music pavilions, and especially Nick Spitzer, and that whole folk life pavilion in which many of us were seeing musicians from the Cajun culture, from Cajun Louisiana, Lafayette and Lake Charles, sometimes for the first time in hearing that music, and especially the visitors who had never heard Cajun music. So it was almost like the Orleanians were getting a dose and learning about its own music, its own regional music. And so there was a real education process all over with that too.
I came from Washington, D.C., and every year there is the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. It's a big deal. And they feature different countries, different regions. When I got to Spokane, they had signed up the Smithsonian to do a folklife festival on the Northwest. And when Spokane ran into financial difficulties and the government was withdrawing support, the Smithsonian withdrew. And I had this big space and this great concept of the cultures there, which is mining and lumbering and Indians, railroading. And so I hired a man and we produced our own folk festival. And it was a terrific success. People came and they worked on quilts, they built boats, they got to log roll, they panned for gold. And it was that concept that we took further to New Orleans. And it works. And yet it's my life is birds, balloons, bands, fireworks, flags, and fountains. That's what I do. And in New Orleans, birds, balloons, bands, booze, and fireworks, flags, fountains, and food. But if you look at that, in our opening ceremony, all those elements were there, thanks to Tommy, and it's why it works. And my business, because basically after Spokane and before New Orleans, but enhanced by New Orleans, I said I was in the E business. Engage, entertain, educate, enrich through exciting, innovative experiences. And urban entertainment is what has come out of the World's Fairs. That's why you have more theme parks, you have these pop-ups, you have all sorts of things happening. And part of the demise of the malls is they didn't realize they needed to balance the entertainment with the clothing, and that's been my life. They're called urban entertainment districts. My company is PETR Productions, providing entertainment through reality. And we say Disney makes fantasy real, we make the real fantastic. And we had quite a few projects going on, but the economy and COVID kind of just hit us where it shouldn't. And we had some terrific $300-400 million projects. So my son is carrying on. He's with the company Gallagher and Associates that did the Saranac exhibit. They did the World War II Museum. They're working on Armstrong Park, but I'm not sure what's going to happen there. They've done some work with some of the music houses in New Orleans, but it's the way it has to be in the future. And like World's Fairs, which have an organizing premise, a theme, you have to have an organizing premise as you go forward in almost anything you do. When you see it in a film, when you see it on Broadway, you know it and it clicks. When you don't see it, it fails.
Peter, let me ask you, why don't we have World's Fairs, as many World's Fairs today? What has changed?
What do? You just don't have it in the U.S. And the problem in the U.S. is that the government really doesn't want them. They don't endorse them. and it has to be public-private. And if you don't have the government out doing World's Fairs, they're not going to happen. But we had Dubai, there's Osaka coming, Minneapolis has put in for 2027. Italy is talking about a World's Fair. I mean, there's easily one every 10 years, but not in the United States. But Minneapolis and Los Angeles are talking about it. The problem is without really government endorsement. I did a little work on the Shanghai World's Fair. The government put no money into it all. We had to get sponsors. The architect was Canadian. Can you believe what and basically it was the head of Pepsi-Cola that made it come together. Now, the other one in Spain that the U.S. had, the pavilion went bankrupt. The one in Dubai, the U.S. pavilion, I have some friends in the White House, and I said, who paid for Dubai? And they say, only the White House knows. He said, we at the State Department have no idea who paid for it. We think it was either Saudi Arabia or Dubai.
Peter, let me ask you, one feeling is that because of the internet, okay, which was not part of the equation 40 years ago, the fact that everything is so instantaneous now, that maybe the whole concept of having a place for innovation to show some kind of, new invention, that there isn't a need for that kind of novelty. So I would assume then World's Fairs have to change, like you say, they have to be more entertainment oriented, and of course an educational aspect, but it's not necessarily about showing innovation. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. Dubai has done the right thing. They basically built the World's Fair and they turned it into a city. So the pavilion, the best pavilion, which was about the future, is staying. It's a museum of the future. I told people that come to me that that's the way to do this kind of business, to get the economic impact, to clean up the warehouse district. You need to create an event that's permanent, but that it has all the ingredients of a World's Fair. But economically, it's basically the next generation. Now, Disney, brilliant man, never touched the future. And he realized that it would be out of date very quickly, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look how often they issue an iPhone. So theme parks don't go there. And if you go there, you've got to rotate exhibits. And the key about trade shows, the consumer show in Las Vegas, that's the future. Everybody goes there and you're getting buyer and seller together. That's the key. And when you get buyer and seller together, you're going to do deals. People are going to see something. They're going to be motivated to improve on it. And that's where the U.S. really exceeds. And people come from all around the world to our trade shows, but they're big.
Oh, so they succeed.
That's why
that concept succeeds, you said, like a trade show as opposed to a World's Fair.
That's right, and that's why the convention center does so well.
I see, yeah.
It brings buyer and seller together.
So, Peter, of course, in the span of your time at the fair, before, during, and during the fair, I'm sure you had a chance to meet a lot of famous people. Tell me about some of your memories with that.
Well, in my business, you do all sorts of things with celebrities. You have openings with presidents and vice presidents and secretaries, all various departments. You have a whole host of entertainers, because to have a World's Fair in your resume is really good. It helps you in selling your act and touring it and so forth. So we get a lot of those people, and they're kind of fun, and you take them around. Lots of times I give them a medallion, a gift. At the World's Fair, there are quite a few that come to mind, but the first ones basically are Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, the astronauts that were the first on the moon. We had the space shuttle, and NASA arranged for them to come to the fair, and we had a big dinner for them, and everyone that attended the dinner got a wonderful thing for framing with their patch, their signatures, Louisiana World Exposition. And for me, that's very memorable. And when we have all these anniversaries, I bring my plaque out. It's not a plaque, it will be framed. So that's number one. Number two is Lee Iacocca. Now, I'm an engineer, I'm a car guy. Thanks to Lindy Boggs, here's the story. When the government was going through the bailout for all of the motor car manufacturers, she was instrumental in making sure that Chrysler got lots of money. And in return, Iacocca said, we'll put a pavilion at the World's Fair. And he came to open it. I spent the better part of the day with him and his team. I'd read his book, and it was very memorable. Now, on the other side, there's the fake celebrity. And I got a call one day, and Michael Jackson's at the gate, and he wants to come in. I said, well, it's not Michael Jackson, but it's a lookalike. So I went to the ticket booth, and here he was, and he was good. He was performing, and but obviously not Michael Jackson, but close. So I said to security, we're going to let him in. And I said, follow him around because he couldn't generate a lot. And so that's a celebrity, but not a real celebrity. Now, the other one, which you'll appreciate, is Willard Scott. And Willard Scott was a very close friend of mine. Our wives worked together at Crippled Children, and we traveled together. We did New Year's, Christmas. Anyway, I talked to Willard about doing the 1 year to go. I said, we need a big 1 year to go deal. And could you get the Today Show to broadcast from New Orleans? And he did. I don't know if you remember, but he came, and Paul Prudhomme cooked black and red fish, and we had a big clock. He started to count down on the clock, and we had a wire walker. The wire walker was the prince of the high wire. He was Canadian. And we rigged the wire across the Mississippi, which was no small task. And we had the Coast Guard. And he came into my office, and Tommy and I talked to him. And we said, do you have any safety? No, I just walked across the wire. And we said, no, please, let's put a belt on that you can let him be hooked to the wire. And we did, and he fell. And fortunately, he was hooked up. So they had to get to him, we had to lower the wire. Now, this is all going on while we're having our year to go meeting, corporation meeting, annual meeting. And I'm getting messages, he's fallen, he's okay, the Coast Guard's coming, they're lowering the wire. And then, you may remember, he slugged the cameraman that was on the shore, taking his pictures while he was being unhooked from the wire. Well, it was not a good omen, not a good sign, but we got coverage in every market in the United States. So in one way, it was terrific.
Any final words, Peter?
It was a wonderful experience. I had memories. In many ways, it was the best of worlds and the worst of worlds. It should not have had the financial difficulty. It should have been a success across the board, not just residual, not just show, but financial. It's a shame that the public-private partnership failed. Just real quick, The best example of the public-private partnership of today is space. NASA has given up building the rockets. For example, you've got Elon Musk, he's going to go to the moon, and Boeing. They've got private companies working with the government, with NASA, and that's the way major problems, challenges, World's Fairs should be handled in the future.
You have contributed so much to our celebrating the 40th anniversary and the legacy of the fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're terrific.